in the Alter Rebbe's days, you have to remember that the Alter Rebbe started something, the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov and the Mesirus Nefesh started something in Yiddishkeit that was a novel idea, completely a new idea. In a way, we can compare it to a few things. We can compare it to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu started the idea of believing in one Eibishter and Hashem, when all the people over there were worshiping idols. And then we have the Beis Hamikdash, Rishon and Hasheni, also in a way were at such a level of something very special in Yiddishkeit, where the Yidden had these miracles happen in the Beis Hamikdash. And if you look back in the history, every time almost that something new, some new revelation came into the world, like Moshe Rabbeinu with the Torah and so on, it was very difficult, it was very tough. Why? Because the Eibishter created the world in a way where the negative forces also have a say. They don't have a say, but they are able to sometimes block and oppose good things that happen in this world. So each time that something new came into the world, which was positive, which was good, it was very difficult. A lot of work had to go into it. As a matter of fact, we'll talk about it soon, that Avraham Avinu literally sacrificed his life in a physical, in a literal way, not in a figurative way. In the end, Hashem saved him, but he on his own didn't know that he's going to survive. He was ready for anything because he saw the truth. He saw that there's only one Eibishter, and that's what he wanted to publicize in the world, that there's only one God. We'll talk about it soon, Mr. Shem. But what I'm trying to bring out here is that there's some difficult times when something great comes about in Yiddishkeit. In many ways, we look at Mashiach's coming, which is so great. We have such a difficult exile, all because we know that this tremendous revelation of Mashiach is going to be so special that all these negative forces have worked very hard to try and delay it. But now we're holding very close with Hashem's help. So this is going to be an era in the Alter Rebbe's times. We all know, everyone knows the famous imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, and he came out on Yitzchak Kislev. But this was about 7, 8 years before the Alter Rebbe was placed into prison. And it was a very difficult time for the Alter Rebbe. It's actually this whole story, which I'm going to have to divide into two, Mitzvah Hashem, is what they call in English a tearjerker, because it shows us the tremendous suffering of the Alter Rebbe and how he was ready to sacrifice his life. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, who heard this story from person to person all the way back to the Alter Rebbe's days, from his grandmother Rebbetzin Rivka, the Rebbe Maharash's Rebbetzin, from his uncle, the Rebbe Shneir Zalman Aaron, who was his father's brother. So the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us this story, and we'll first do an introduction, and then we'll go into the more details. The year Tov Kuf Nun Beis, which is 1792, that year was considered in the history of the Alter Rebbe as a very, very tough, a very hard year for the Alter Rebbe. For many months, beginning from Rosh Hashanah of the year Tov Kuf Nun Beis, which is still 1791, all the way till Shavuos 1792, Tov Kuf Nun Beis, the Alter Rebbe was suffering immensely, and nobody knew about it. Not even his close family members, not even his son, the Mittler Rebbe. Nobody knew what's going on in the Alter Rebbe, how the Alter Rebbe is feeling, his terrible suffering. And mostly it was because of the persecution of the Misnagdim against the Chassidim. The Misnagdim at that time, this is quite a few years after the Mesirus Nefesh passed away, 6 or 7 years, and the Misnagdim were literally causing trouble to every Hasidic community, wherever they lived, in Russia and Ukraine. The Misnagdim persecuted them and caused them tremendous, and in Lithuania, tremendous suffering for the Hasidim. The Alter Rebbe knew all about this, and it hurt him very, very badly. That year, Shavuos, Tov Kuf Nun Beis, 1792, the Alter Rebbe Fabringed, he gathered with the Chassidim as usual. Now, the Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos. So the Alter Rebbe on Shavuos, whenever he would gather on Shavuos, Fabring on Shavuos, he would talk about the Baal Shem Tov. That was the usual order of the Fabringans on Shavuos. This year, Tov Kuf Nun Beis, however,
He never met the Baal Shem Tov.
Yes, he did, by his upshernish, remember?
Only then.
Only then, yes. He never saw the Baal Shem Tov, he never heard anything from the Baal Shem Tov. in this world.
Directly.
Directly. He did hear from Baal Shem Tov teachings, but from the world above. They were very great tzaddikim who were able to, they weren't confined to this world, sort of. That Shavuos of Tov Nun Beis, 1792, the Alter Rebbe sat there by the Farbrengen. He spoke, but everyone felt a certain bitterness, a deep bitterness in the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was concentrating, was very within himself. His face they were able to see, but his eyes were closed. His lips were whispering something quietly, and tears were coming out of his eyes on his cheeks. From the seriousness, all those present, and some of them were great Chassidim. If we would have met them today, none of us would think they were just Chassidim, because they were literally tzaddikim with Ruach HaKodesh, many of them. They understood that the Alter Rebbe is now praying and asking Hashem for mercy for we don't know what. Nobody knew what it was. And not only that, but the Chassidim who were present felt that the Baal Shem Tov and the Mesirus Nefesh are both present in the room there with the Alter Rebbe. Suddenly, the Alter Rebbe stood up from his place, and with a crying voice, he called out, Zayde, meaning the Baal Shem Tov, Rebbe, meaning the Mesirus Nefesh, evoke mercy, a lot of mercy for me, for your students, for your Mekusharim, those followers of yours, the Chassidim, and for your teachings. And the Alter Rebbe concluded by saying, Oi, oi, gewalt, gewalt, like, whoa, Father in heaven, have mercy on us. And the Alter Rebbe fell into a deep faint. The people there was a tremendous commotion. The people didn't know what to do. The family, the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe's and daughters, came running. Immediately they sent someone for the doctor. Yoino, the doctor, he was called in Liozner. And I just want to, in parentheses, the Alter Rebbe had 3 daughters. One was called Rebbetzin Freda. One was called Rebbetzin Dvoira Leah. And the third one was called Rebbetzin Rachel. So the daughters, they ran and called the doctor, Yoino the doctor. But in the meantime, the Alter Rebbe's grandson, who was the Tzemach Tzedek, a little boy of 2 years old and 9 months at that time of Shavuos. He came running in and he sees his grandfather is sprawled on the floor. So he jumped onto his grandfather and he screamed, Zayde, Zayde, grandfather, grandfather. At that moment, the Alter Rebbe opened his holy eyes and he saw how his grandchild of 2 years and 9 months old is stretching out his hands and he's screaming, Zayde, hold my hand and get up. The Alter Rebbe grabbed the hand of his grandchild and he said these words, Havli Yodcho, which in Aramaic means, give me your hand. And the Alter Rebbe stood up and then said about the Tzemach Tzedek, the little boy, Zeh Yenachamenu. It is explained by Chassidim and by the Frierdiker Rebbe that the word Havli Yodcho in Aramaic, which means give me your hand, is an actual story in Masechta Brachas. Over there, it tells a story about a sage, a Tana or an Amoira called Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, who became very ill. And Rabbi Yochanan came to be Mevakeh Choyle, to visit him. And Rabbi Yochanan asked him if he's in pain, and he said yes. So Rabbi Yochanan said, surely you know that pain and suffering in this world has a reward for it, that it forgives the sins. So Rabbi Chia Bar Abba answered to Rabbi Yochanan, I don't need the reward and I don't need the pain. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, by the way, the Gemara says it clearly. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Havli Yotcha, give me your hand. And Rabbi Chia Bar Abba gave him his hand and stood up and miraculously was healed on the spot. Says the Gemara, a while later, Rabbi Yochanan became sick. And who came to him? Rabbi Chanino, another sage. Same story repeated itself, says the Gemara. He asked him if he's in pain. He said yes. He says, pain has a reward to it. He says, I don't want the reward and I don't want the pain. So he said, Havli Yotcha, and he stood up, healed. Then Rabbi Eliezer, says the Gemara, got sick. And Rabbi Yochanan came to him, and the same repeat. Havli Yotcha, he said, I don't need the pain, I don't need the reward. We want to live like Yidden in this world. And he gave him his hand and he stood up. Seemingly, the words Havli Yotcha has some spiritual power to heal a person. And this is what the Alter Rebbe said, Havli Yotcha, and he stood up. Then he said to him, Zeh Yenachamenu. Zeh Yenachamenu means this one will comfort us, will console us. This is written by Noach in the Torah, in Parshas Breishis, and then in Noach, in Parshas Breishis, in the end, it says that when Noach started doing the positive things in the world, he was called Noach because Zeh Yenachamenu. And it's interesting that Rashi mentions the word Menachem in his explanation, that the word Yenachamenu has to do with the word Menachem. Tzemach Tzedek's name was Menachem Mendel. Chassidim also explained that actually this was a prophetic thing that the Alter Rebbe said, that the Tzemach Tzedek became the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he brought the Chassidic teachings of Lubavitch to a much higher level than before. And not only that, but they all say that the Alter Rebbe's prophecy here went all the way to our Rebbe, who was also by the same name of Menachem Mendel, our Rebbe, and he's a direct descendant from the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is also Zeh Yenachamenu, he will comfort us. And it's very interesting because if you look at the life and the history of the Rebbe coming after World War II, such a terrible tragedy, and how the Rebbe comforted every single Jew that came in contact with him. And today, not only those who came in contact with him, but all the Jews in the world get comfort from the Rebbe. Anyway, back to the story. In that year, so this is what happened on Shavuos. This is all an introduction to the details. That year in Elul, the Alter Rebbe asked his daughter, Devorah Leah, who was the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek was born one day before Rosh Hashanah, almost 3 years earlier. He was born in the Chof Tes Elul, the last day of Elul, in the year Tov Kuf Mem Tes, which is 1789. So on Rosh Hashanah, Tzemach Tzedek was 1 day old. Now he's 3 years old almost. So in Elul, the Alter Rebbe asked his daughter to bring in the crib, the bed of the Tzemach Tzedek into his room. He said, I would like that he shouldn't forget what he learned. This is 3 years old. I guess he meant what he learned before he was born. And Alter Rebbe benched him on Erev Rosh Hashanah of that year. Now, how many years is the Alter Rebbe already leading the Chassidim, and spreading and publicizing Chassidus, Hafotzas HaMayonos? 18 years. The Alter Rebbe started in Tov Kuf Lamed Daled, which is 1774, approximately, when the Mesirus Nefesh was nostalgic, passed away. So for 18 years, the Alter Rebbe is making tremendous progress in teaching Chassidus and spreading Chassidus all over Europe. It was a tremendous success. 18 years already. It's already 18 years by 1792, Tov Kuf Nun Beis. This, says the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Frierdiker Rebbe describes it, caused a tremendous prosecution of the negative forces in heaven. We'll talk about that a little more clear later. There were 3 reasons that caused a tremendous negative prosecution, kitrug, against Alter Rebbe. That year, Tov Kuf Nun Beis, the Alter Rebbe sent a messenger with a pidyon nefesh, begging for mercy, not begging for mercy, but asking that the Mesirus Nefesh, his Rebbe, should awaken mercy in heaven. And he sent the shliach to Anipoli, with the Mesirus Nefesh's resting places. And another shliach he sent to Mezibush, which is with the Baal Shem Tov's resting places. And one chassid called Reb Yaakov of Smilyan, who was a famous chassid of the Alter Rebbe, he was also a shadar. He used to collect money from the chassidim for tzedakah from the Alter Rebbe. So Reb Yaakov of Smilyan, the Alter Rebbe sent him personally with a pidyon nefesh to the oldest one of the Chavraya Kadisha at that time, who was called Reb Menachem Nochem of Chernobyl. The Alter Rebbe sent him. Right before Rosh Hashanah, the Alter Rebbe called some of his older Chassidim, and he told them there's a very serious situation, a kitrug l'mayla. And he is suspicious, he's suspecting, says the Alter Rebbe, that right after Rosh Hashanah, this is Tov Kuf Nun Gimel, the beginning of Tov Kuf Nun Gimel, right after Rosh Hashanah, the kitrug, the prosecution, will be switched over from the teachings of Chassidus that they're against to him personally. And the Alter Rebbe asked some of these Chassidim to help out his son, the Mittler Rebbe, in leading the Chassidim, which was sort of a hint that the Alter Rebbe is losing his life, God forbid. The Alter Rebbe's daughter, Dvorah Leah, she found out about it. Erev Rosh Hashanah, that Tzemach Tzedek had his upsharnish. That's his birthday, Erev Rosh Hashanah. The Alter Rebbe made the upsharnish. Again, this is all an introduction to know what we're talking about. The Alter Rebbe put his hands on Tzemach Tzedek's head and he benched him. That day, Erev Rosh Hashanah, in the afternoon, after Mincha, the Rebbetzin Dvorah Leah, the Alter Rebbe's daughter, whose husband was called Reb Sholem Shachna, she had one son, Tzemach Tzedek, one boy. She ran into the shul. She didn't run it. She went into the shul where some of the older Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were sitting and saying Tehillim, and she went over to the Aron Kodesh, and she opened up the Aron Kodesh, and she said, and she announced, the whole crowd, the whole minyan over here, the whole kohol. She said to them, you are witnesses that in front of the holy Sefer Torah, she accepts upon herself with a clear mind and with an oath that she, Dvorah Leah Bas Shterna, is exchanging her life for her father's life, Reb Shneur Zalman ben Rivka, that he should remain alive. That's what she announced. Again, this is all an introduction. Now we're going to go into the details that the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us. Frierdiker Rebbe describes it like this. Also, that Tzemach Tzedek, many years later, in Tov Kuf Tzadi Gimel, explained what caused this prosecution against the Alter Rebbe. First of all, the Tzemach Tzedek explained that just like Avraham Avinu, who gave up his life for spreading Yiddish, spreading the Eibishter's belief, so it was by the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was ready to pass away just so that the teachings of Chassidus should continue. Now let's see what was the reason for this prosecution. So the Tzemach Tzedek explained there were three reasons. Number one, the Alter Rebbe was very successful in publicizing Chassidus. Hundreds, if not thousands, of great scholars of the Misnagdim went over to become Chassidim. It was tremendously successful. This caused the Misnagdim to be extremely angry at the Alter Rebbe, more than any of the other Chassidic Rebbes. And they tried very hard to get the Vilna Gaon to go out in an open war against the Alter Rebbe. The Vilna Gaon did not want to agree. Certain things they convinced him, but in general he did not want to agree to go out in full war against the Alter Rebbe. But these people who thrived on fights, not all of them, some Misnagdim were very honest and serious people, but some weren't, and they caused this tremendous upheaval against the Chassidim. They actually, the Vilna Gaon was getting older, they signed documents in the Vilna Gaon's name. He did not know about it. We know this from testimony from Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who was an early Misnagdish Gadol, who was a Talmid of the Vilna Gaon, and he himself removed himself from the whole fight against Chassidim because he saw what the truth was. So the reason number one for a prosecution is the success the Alter Rebbe had. Number two is that, unfortunately, for a long time, the Chavrayo, that means the Talmidim of the Mezritcher Magid, were very good with each other. There was total peace between them. And at this time, someone came and spoke Lashon Hara against the Alter Rebbe to other Rebbes from Poland. And some of them, unfortunately, accepted it. Also, in Eretz Yisrael, they went to one of the tzaddikim there who used to be a very close friend of the Alter Rebbe. As a matter of fact, the Alter Rebbe saved some of these tzaddikim's lives during the Mezritcher Magid's days, and they spoke Lashon Hara, and an inner fight, sort of argument, started between some of these tzaddikim against the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was so pained by it, it was very hard for him to take. And the third thing that caused the prosecution against the Alter Rebbe was the beginning of the revelation of the Holy Tanya. The Alter Rebbe started the Tanya by saying it as Maimorim, as Hasidic discourses. Maimorim in front of the Hasidim by Fabreyan. He said it once, all the 53 prokim more or less that we know today. And the year that Tzemach Tzedek was born, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Tov Kuf Mem Tes, the next day was the first day of Rosh Hashanah of the new year, Tov Kuf Nun. That day, the Alter Rebbe said a Maimah Chassidus, which was the three first prokim of Tanya the way we know it today. And for the next 3 years, Tov Kuf Nun, Nun Aleph, and Nun Beis, the Alter Rebbe went through the whole Tanya. And this cause a tremendous ayin horror of the negative forces of the Satan. And the Tzemach Tzedek said it was the same type of ayin horror like the first and second Beis Hamikdash that they destroyed. And the teachings of Chassidus was in great danger now, and the Alter Rebbe's life was in great danger. Let's go now and see what actually happened. Says the Friedrich Rebbe in the year Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, 1791-92, the flower, the Shoshana, the rose of Chassidus was blooming, and it was very successful. And a terrible ayin hara came against Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe sent Reb Yaakov Smilyan with a Mesirus Nefesh to the Reb Nochem Chernobyler. One day, in that year of Tov Kufun Beis, the Alter Rebbe called in his daughter, the Rebbe Tzedvor Leah, and he started talking to her. He started telling her why he gave her the name Dvor Leah. What was his intentions? There were many people with the name Dvor Leah, but she had the name from the Alter Rebbe's aunt. The Alter Rebbe's father was Reb Baruch, his sister was Dvor Leah. Dvor Leah, the Alter Rebbe's aunt, was a Melumedis. She was a tremendous scholar. She knew how to learn Gemara and Rambam and Shulchan Aruch and so on. The Alter Rebbe's daughter, Rebbe Tzedvor Leah, not only knew how to learn Gemara, Shulchan Aruch and so on, but in Chassidus, she was considered in her knowledge and understanding as one of the top Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. That's how special she was. She was the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Alter Rebbe called her in and started telling her about her name, and then started telling her about himself, about the situation of Chassidim. He told it to her just to share with one of his family members, seemingly. He started telling her that Baruch Hashem, the hard labor that went into publicizing Chassidus was successful, very great success, but unfortunately there's a bad, evil eye against it. And even though, said the Alter Rebbe to her, he thinks that milamaila, from above, he will be able to have a little bit of an effect, or a big effect, on what's going on here, a hint that he's going lamaila chas v'shalom. But this is not the way of teaching of Chassidus, he said. Chassidus demands tikkun. Tikkun means that it should be done in a normal Torah way. And therefore it has to be done from this world, lamato, everything has to be done here. Yet, he was ready for it, the Alter Rebbe, but he felt bad for Chassidim and Chassidus. Soon we're going to hear what detailed words the Alter Rebbe told the Rebbe Tzedvor Leah, which are unbelievable, shocking words. She understood what's going on from all those words, which we're going to find out later. She didn't answer anything to her father at that time. She left. A short while later, she came back and told her father, Tata, for that, you are not allowed to agree to that. In other words, you can't agree to them taking you away. She didn't say those words. She said, you can't agree with that. The Rebbe Tzedvor Leah understood from the talk she had with her father that the situation is very frightening. Her father's life is hanging in the balance. For a few days she was walking around totally confused. She did not know what can she do with this information that she got. She decided that she must reveal this situation to a few Chassidim, chosen Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, and ask for them to help her with advice, to give her advice. And she made a decision before she even asked for advice. Her decision was she's going to give her life for the Alter Rebbe, for her father. The Rebbe Tzedvor Leah then called the three from the oldest Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, namely Reb Moshe Meislish. These are all famous Chassidim in the history of Chabad. Reb Pinchas Reizes, Reb Moshe Meislish, everyone knows he was the one who spied for the Russian army later on in the War of Napoleon towards the end of the Alter Rebbe's life in this world. Correct. So Reb Moshe Meislish was a person who was able to control his heartbeat. Think about it. He was also a tremendous chassid of the Alter Rebbe, and was makar of a lot of Yidden to Chassidus. The next one was a Pinchas Reizes, who was a chayzer. He used to repeat all the Alter Rebbe's teachings, Maimorim, word for word. They called him the field marshal, I think. Is that a right word in English? Yeah. The chief of staff, of Chabad. And the third one was Reb Moshe Vilenker, a Jew who was a Misnagid at first and was one of the top Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. A man, these three people were called the lions of the Chassidic movement. She called them in and told them that she's asking them to promise her to listen everything that she's going to tell them to do. And it has to be with an oath, with a shvua, not just a promise, but an oath, a strict oath, sure. And it has to remain secret until the time comes that we can reveal it. These three Chassidim, who were called the lions of the Chassidim, had very powerful minds. They wouldn't get, nervous and scared of things. They were powerful people. Yet, from what she said to them, they became very emotional. And they said to her, "We can't do such a thing. We have to first talk it over. We have to think about it amongst ourselves. If we can agree to somebody's conditions like that, like we're going to make a shvur that whatever you tell us to do, we're going to do, you have to give us 1 day," they said to her. In those days, the Alter Rebbe, for many months, was closed in his room more than usual. And even his biggest chassidim were not able to come and see the Alter Rebbe when they wanted. He was in his room called the Gan Eden HaElyon, and they felt that there was something terrible happening to chassidim. But what is happening and how do we stop it? Nobody knew. Now that the Rebbe is telling them such things, that they should make a shvur, that they'll agree to everything she says, they got very, very nervous, these great Chassidim. They sat all day discussing this matter. I'm sure, it doesn't say it, but I'm sure that every kind of idea, they were so smart that they were able to think of every idea what might be happening. But it doesn't say that over here. I'm just thinking why it took them so long. All night, a day and a night, they sat discussing it, and finally they came to a conclusion that the situation is very tough. And the only one who knows what's going on is the Rebbe Tzendvar. Nobody else knows. So who can tell them what's going on? Only she can tell them. Therefore, they decided they're going to do exactly what she says. They came back, and to tell her that they agreed, she greeted them very graciously. And when they said they agree, she started saying these words: "We all Chassidim of our father, our Rebbe, all of us, are obligated to give our lives, literally, not figuratively, for our father, our Rebbe, and for his teachings, which are the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov." She stopped talking and burst out crying. Hearing these words, the Chassid, Reb Moshe Meislish, stood up from his place, totally frightened, and said, "Why are you crying? Tell us. What is going on? I am the first one," said Reb Moshe Meislish, "to go and die in fire or water for our holy Rebbe, for the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Tell us what to do, and I will go besimcha v'tuv levov miroiv koil. I will go with total happiness with Mesirus Nefesh for the Rebbe, like the Alter Rebbe tells us about being besimcha." "First of all," said the Rebbe Tzendvar, "I demand from you three to swear an oath to me that cannot be annulled." I guess there's such an oath according to the Torah, that you will fulfill everything that I ask you to fulfill. And the shvur, the oath, should not be an oath that you're making on your own, but an oath on my account, which means I'm the only one who can do anything about that oath. It's possible to do such a thing. Because you don't know what I'm going to tell you to do, so therefore you have to make the oath on my account. In other words, that I'm the only one in control of your oath. And it has to be a very powerful oath that cannot be annulled. And even if it's something that's going to take a life away, God forbid. That's what she told him. Hearing these words, even the Chassid, Reb Moshe Vilenker, who was known amongst Chassidim to be a person that's very calm, never gets too excited, very intellectual, he got so emotional. And he said, "Wait, a thing like that, we have to think it over." He was afraid to agree with it. Reb Moshe Meislish and Reb Pinchas Reizes did not want to continue this, meaning to say they didn't want to go back to discussing it. And they said to Reb Moshe Vilenker, "We already agreed to fulfill all the conditions." And they too overruled Reb Moshe Vilenker, and they made an oath according to the Torah that cannot be annulled in other words, with the control of Rebbe being in control. Now, said the Rebbe Tzendvar, she tells them, "I'm making you into a bezdin. I'm appointing you as a Jewish bezdin, a Jewish court of law. and you have to accept to become a bezdin, to paskin, to make a decree, a halacha, a practical halacha that's going to actually happen according to our Torah. And then she said to them these words. The situation that's going on right now is specifically from the Misnagdim hurting the Chassidim, specifically from other Chassidish Rebbes who accepted Lashon Hara against the Alter Rebbe, and therefore there's a split amongst the Chassidish Rebbes, is very frightening. And according to the words I heard from my father, she said to them, the situation the result can be disastrous. And she started telling them what her father said. Her father said these words: 30 years takes for a good tree to start giving fruits. In other words, for 30 years, you got to take care of the tree, water it the right way, and do whatever has to be done so it can start giving its fruits. The teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the tree of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and the Mesirus Nefesh are now a living tree, said the Alter Rebbe. But now there's a terrible prosecution, a terrible kitrug l'maylo, that can, God forbid, rip out the entire tree. And the Alter Rebbe said these words: I want to live. Because that's what the Torah says. A person, a yid, has to want to live. But even more than that, he says, I want to take care of the tree of the Baal Shem Tov and the Mesirus Nefesh to make sure that it gives fruits until the coming of Mashiach. My Rebbe, the Mesirus Nefesh, said the Alter Rebbe to his daughter, this is what she's repeating, what he told her, told me that there will be some very hard times coming upon me, and he will always help me. And I recently saw the face of my Rebbe and the face of the Baal Shem Tov in a vision, and their faces were dark, black, which is a sign that their teachings are in danger, and it's a sign. She didn't end what the Alter Rebbe said. She didn't finish the words. But then she said these words, a sign that all those three Chassidim started crying bitterly. But they were at a loss. What should they do? So she concluded and said like this. And therefore, she said, she decided to give her life instead of the life of her father. And she wants to be instead of him. She's going to give her life to her father, and she's going to go to Gan Eden, and he will live a good long life in order to strengthen the tree that he planted. And this way, she said, she too will be Zoiche, she'll have a merit in the teachings of Chassidus. Her neshama will have a merit. They had no choice, and this is actually the reason why the Rebbetzin Dvei made them swear that shvur. She knew they would never be able to agree to such a thing. As a Jewish bezin, to say that she should lose her life for her father. So therefore she made them swear, and they had no choice anymore. Back to what was happening in the world of the Alter Rebbe, is that Reb Nochem Chernobyler, who was the oldest one of the Talmidim of the Mesirus Nefesh, when the Baal Shem and Alter Rebbe's Pidyon Nefesh, which means the request to ask for mercy from Hashem, came to Reb Nochem Chernobyler, he was in the mikveh to Toivel for Shoshana, I guess. He was not yet in the water, but he was in the mikveh. And he said, he's waiting. He asked him, what are you waiting for? There's no telephones in those days. He said, he's waiting because it seems like they're bringing me a Pidyon Nefesh from Lezne. He was in Chernobyl, far away. After that, this was happening at Chernobyl. By the Alter Rebbe called 10 of his greatest Chassidim, and he said to them, this Rosh Hashanah, we're going to need a lot of help, he said. Because even he, Reb Nochem, wasn't able to help. And he's the oldest of the whole Chavraya, all the Talmidim of the Mesirus Nefesh. That's what the Alter Rebbe said. I'll say a drop more. That year, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, after davening, the first night of Rosh Hashanah that year, after davening, the Alter Rebbe would never talk. He wouldn't say a word on the first night of Rosh Hashanah. But that year, he asked, "Where is Dvar Leah?" When he saw Dvar Leah, the Alter Rebbe started saying Lashana, and suddenly the Rebbe's and Dvar Leah took over, sort of. He said Lashana. He wanted to say Lashana Teivet, and she said Lashana Teivet Tikasim. Father, Tate, don't talk. She said, because she knew that if he says Lashana Teivet to her, she'll live, and she won't be able to do her idea of giving her life up to the Alter Rebbe. The next day, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, the Alter Rebbe said Maimorim all day until Havdalah, till Havdalah time. After Havdalah, the Alter Rebbe called his daughter, Rebbetzin Dvayaleah, and her husband, Reb Shalom Shachner, into his room. Reb Shalom Shachner stood by the wall crying and asking, what do we do with a child of 3 years old? And such a child. They were talking about the Al Tzemach Tzedek, who was a very special child. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, she was completely healthy. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, she suddenly started feeling weak. And Tzem Gedalia, the next day, with a clear mind, to the last moment, she passed her neshama to Gan Eden and passed away. Her last request from her father was that he should educate and guide her son, her only son, the Tzemach Tzedek. And as Chassidim explained, maybe the Frierdiker Rebbe explains it, that she did not chas v'shalom do this like a condition or a reward. She just asked for a favor that he should take care of the child. And the Alter Rebbe said to her these words, this is Motzei Rosh Hashanah, your son Menachem comforts me, and he will be a comfort for you, and he will be a comfort for all of Klal Yisrael. The Chassidim, after this story, for all the generations, even the greatest Chassidim, when they would mention the name Dvar Leah, the Rebbetzin Dvar Leah, they would mention it with such awe and respect, especially those three Chassidim that we mentioned before, Reb Moshe Meislish and Reb Moshe Vilenker and Reb Pinchas Reizes. Because every one of them knew that she saved the tree of life of Chassidus, and it's all because of her that we have the Rabbeim and the teachings of Chassidus up until Mashiach comes. There was a Chassid called Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain. I'm going to stop after this paragraph. Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain, a Chassid Alter Rebbe, who was a very special person, a Lamdan scholar and a Mekubal. He knew Kabbalah very well. The Alter Rebbe said that his neshama shines in a revealed way. During the funeral of the Rebbetzin Dvar Leah, this Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain held the Tzemach Tzedek on his hands. The Alter Rebbe said the first Kaddish, and after him, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was only 3 years old now, 3 years and a few days, he said the Kaddish together with Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain. Rebbe Eliyahu, I said Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain, I think. Rebbe Eliyahu Ruvain, who was a very big Chassid Alter Rebbe. All right, well, later on we'll discuss what happened in the days after Rosh Hashanah. Zchuso Yogan Aleinu. We have many, many great women today. All Jewish women are called Noshim Tzidkanis, who have the name Dvar Leah, all in her schus. And we'll see a little later, first of all, after she passed away, a few times things happened from Shamayim that she gave over and had an effect on Chassidus, even way after her Ptira. And we'll talk about that. It's an amazing story that happened with her son, it's Tzemach Tzedek, etc. But we'll learn later. Next week, we'll talk what happened in the next few days with Alter Rebbe.